This building is a joke. Craig says it loud enough for the whole break room to hear, tapping his knuckles against the folding table like it'll make the point land harder. He's the regional director, flown in for the quarterly safety meeting, and he's spent the last 10 minutes complaining about the loading dock configuration, the outdated AC unit, and the vacant unit next door that's been sitting empty for over a year. Whoever owns this place doesn't care, never fixes anything until you threaten to pull the lease. You're sitting in the third row, taking notes on your phone about delivery metrics. You don't look up. You've heard some version of this complaint a dozen times over the past 3 years. From Teresa, from other drivers, from Craig himself on his last visit. What none of them know is that you're 11 feet away from the man they're describing, and he's wearing a brown uniform with your name stitched over the pocket. You could end this conversation in about 4 seconds. You don't. 3 years ago, none of this existed. You were exactly what you look like now. Route 14, 5 days a week, backing your van into the same lot every morning, clocking in through the same side door. The building was just a building. Then, on a slow Tuesday during a mandated 15-minute break, you noticed a faded sign on the break room wall listing the property management company's contact info. You'd read it 200 times without it registering. That day, it stuck. 3 clicks on your phone led to a county property records page. The building wasn't owned by the management company at all, just their client, a small holding entity that owned exactly one property, this warehouse. You didn't think much of it, but it kept nagging at you the way an unscratched itch does. You started noticing details. 38,000 square feet, split into 2 sections. Your delivery station occupied one. The other sat vacant behind a cracked "for lease" banner. Through casual conversation with Teresa, who had no idea why you'd suddenly gotten curious about lease terms, you learned the company paid $19,500 a month for their portion. You started running numbers on your phone during lunch breaks, numbers that kept circling back to something you couldn't stop thinking about. 4 months of learning followed. Cap rates, triple net leases. What a 38,000 square foot industrial building in a secondary market actually trades for, somewhere between $2.8 and $3.6 million, depending on lease terms. You found out the owner was an elderly man named Walter Pruitt, who'd bought the building in 1994 and had been quietly telling his property manager he was tired of dealing with it. You reached out through an LLC with a name forgettable enough that nobody would ever connect it to a guy in a brown uniform. Negotiations took 5 months. Walter wasn't in a hurry. Neither were you. You settled on $3.1 million, $450,000 down, the rest financed through a regional bank willing to work with your gig income because the existing lease covered the debt service on its own. The deal closed on a Thursday, your day off. You spent the morning in a title company's office and told no one, not your girlfriend, not your brother, not a single person at the station. Monday morning, you clocked in, loaded your van with the same packages, and drove out of a lot that now belonged to you. Back in the break room, Craig's still going. "I mean it," he says, looking around at the other drivers for agreement. "The second unit's been empty over a year. That's wasted square footage we could have expanded into if the landlord wasn't so slow to deal with." A driver named Marcus nods along. "Yeah, Teresa's been on the phone with the property manager for weeks about that AC unit too." You remember that call. It was July. The AC above the loading dock failed, and Teresa spent 20 minutes venting to another driver about how the landlord clearly didn't care how hot it got in there. You were 4 feet away sorting packages, saying nothing. 2 days later, an email hit your inbox with a $3,400 repair invoice. You approved it without hesitation. The unit was fixed within the week. Teresa mentioned it a few days later, wondering out loud if someone had finally complained hard enough. You told her you had no idea who owned the place. "You'd think for what they're charging in rent," Craig continues, "they could keep the place running." Another driver, a younger guy named Devin, who's only been on the route about 8 months, leans over toward you. "You've been here longer than any of us. This place always been like this?" You shrug. "Pretty much. Things get fixed eventually." "Eventually," Devin repeats, laughing a little. "Guess that's landlord speak for whenever they feel like it." You almost smile at that, not because it's funny, but because of how close he is to something he doesn't realize he's saying out loud, sitting 3 feet from the answer. This is the part where you'd normally let it go. Sort your route sheet, wait for the meeting to end, drive off in the same direction you always drive. But something about today, maybe it's the tone, maybe it's Craig specifically, a man you've met exactly twice and who talks about landlord the way people talk about bureaucracy, a faceless obstacle, makes you actually think about saying something. Not everything, just enough. You don't? Not yet. 2 months after the AC repair, you leased the vacant unit next door to a regional furniture distributor. $8,200 a month, 5-year term. It was a tenant Craig's own company had been too slow and too cautious to commit to when your property manager first reached out about expanding their footprint. Craig never found out the space filled. He just stopped mentioning it in quarterly meetings, chalking it up, you assumed, to a landlord finally doing something useful with the property. By year 2, the building's combined leases brought in just under $332,000 a year gross. After the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and management fees, it netted somewhere between $118,000 and $134,000, landing in an account with a name on it nobody at the station had ever heard. Your accountant, a woman named Marguerite who's handled small commercial owners for 18 years, paused the first time she reviewed your full picture. Driver income on one side, a $19,500 monthly lease payment on the other. and asked if you understood what you'd actually built. You told her you thought you did. She said she'd never seen this particular setup before. A driver who was simultaneously the landlord of his own workplace. You kept driving anyway, not because you needed the income, but because stopping would have been its own kind of announcement, a change nobody would understand the real reason for. The lease came up for renewal 6 months before this meeting. Right around the same time, the company announced it was considering consolidating your station's territory into a larger regional hub 40 minutes out. You spent those 6 months doing 2 jobs at once without anyone at either end realizing it. As a driver, you heard the rumors secondhand, Teresa fielding anxious questions about whether people would still have roots. As the owner, you sat in calls with your property manager and a leasing broker, weighing what happens to 38,000 square feet if your single largest tenant walked. In the end, the company decided to stay, but renegotiated the lease down to $17,800 a month, citing consolidation savings elsewhere. You approved the new terms through your property manager's email without ever revealing which side of the table you were actually sitting on. Teresa told the team the station wasn't closing, that corporate must have worked something out with the landlord. A few drivers cheered. You clapped along, holding a paper cup of coffee you never finished. Craig's still talking. Anyway, corporate's looking at the lease terms again next cycle. If this place doesn't shape up, we push for the hub instead. You close out the Notes app on your phone. You think about the $8,200 lease you signed with the furniture distributor after Craig's own team dropped the ball. You think about the AC unit fixed within a week of a complaint nobody knew you'd overheard. You think about $2.4 million sitting quietly across 2 accounts nobody in this room has any reason to look up. You think about Devin, 3 feet away, laughing about landlord speak without knowing he was talking to one. You raise your hand, mostly out of habit, the way you always do when you have a route question. Yeah? Craig says, nodding at you. Is the meeting almost done? I've got stops backing up. He checks his watch. Yeah, we're wrapping. Go ahead. You stand up, grab your scanner off the table, and walk out through the same side door you've walked through for 6 years, past the loading dock, past the vacant unit that isn't vacant anymore, into a parking lot that's technically yours, and climb into a van that isn't. The email from Marguerite comes in an hour later, while you're waiting at a gate code on your route. Q4 summary. You read it with the engine running. The gate buzzes. You put the phone down, drive through, and finish the delivery like you would any other stop. Later that night, you back the van into the same lot, clock out through the same door, and drive home in a Corolla with 140,000 miles on it, past the building lit up under sodium lights, nobody inside aware that the man who just left in a brown uniform is the only reason those lights are still on.